There's no Christian, there's no mature theologian on the planet who has perfect theology.
All right. Well, let's hear it. What's the first contention?
All right. Contention number one is that the doctrine that humans occasionally possess libertarian freedom is supported by the biblical data. So let's start with the one that I brought up earlier, 1 Corinthians 10, 13, and actually on through 15. But let's just, let me read that passage here. It says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say." So, the context of this passage has everything to do with the definition of libertarian freedom. And to demonstrate why one is rational to infer libertarian freedom from this passage, and since God commands us to reason together in Isaiah 1:18, let's consider another syllogism. I love syllogisms. So it goes like this. Premise one: if Christians possess the opportunity to exercise an ability to choose among a range of options, each compatible with their regenerated nature at a given moment, then Christians possess libertarian freedom, right? By definition. Two, at the moment of temptation, Christians possess the opportunity to exercise an ability to choose between giving in to temptation or taking the way of escape God promises to provide. I got two options there. Three, therefore, Christians possess libertarian freedom. So Paul is addressing Christians in this passage. So this matter is clearly not about soteriological matters, right? It's not a salvation issue here. Right? A lot of people jump to, but salvation, right? We're not talking about salvation here. We're talking about people who are already saved, right? So, and on top of that, Paul follows this all-important verse with another comment heavily implying libertarian freedom. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 10:15. He says, "I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say." So think about this. If something or someone other than you determines all of your judgments, then you cannot judge for yourself on any matter. So if how I guide my thinking is ultimately determined by and under the control of something or someone else, then I do not have the control condition required for rational responsibility. So someone else is driving that ship, steering that ship. I'm just a passive passenger along for the ride, waiting to see what something or someone else, how they steer the ship. So to support my claim regarding 1 Corinthians 10:15, consider the fact that if God determines you to affirm a false belief about X in the actual world, then you do not possess the opportunity to exercise an ability to infer a better or true belief about X in the actual world. It would be impossible, right? If an omnipotent God causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for you in that situation to infer a better belief, let alone the truth, right? And the ability to infer better and true beliefs seems to be a kind of rationality worth wanting. In fact, most humans think they have it, right? But we don't have it if God always determines our false beliefs, and we're stuck with them. So imagine the pastor who reads Scripture faithfully for decades to try to figure out, pick any theological view. Let's talk about eschatology, and he comes to the position that the premillennial view is true. But the reason he came to that position after studying Scripture is because God causally determined him to think the pre-mill view is true. And the truth of the matter is the post-mill view is true. I'm not endorsing that view. I'm just saying for the sake of conversation here, let's suppose this to be the case. So let's suppose that the post-millennial view is actually true. But God causally determines a pastor who studied Scripture for decades to conclude that the pre-mill view is true. So this pastor, this Christian who loves God, had no ability, no power to infer the truth or even a better view here because he was determined by God to affirm a false theological belief. So I think there's so many problems here. And we can start to expose a problem here with the following argument. Let me give you another one. Premise one: if exhaustive divine determinism, ED, is true, then God causally determines all humans to infer and affirm some false theological beliefs. And think about that. Since no one is infallible, there's no Christian, there's no mature theologian on the planet who has perfect theology. So what does this mean? If God determines everything, that means that God is determining even mature Christian theologians to affirm false beliefs about God and ultimate reality. All right, premise 2. If God, who turns out to be a deity of deception on this view, think about it. If God causally determines every single human, including mature theologians, to affirm false theological beliefs, I can't think of a better term than deity of deception. We're really left with something that's not much different than a Cartesian demon. Gosh, I'm not trying to be disrespectful here. I'm just saying this is one reason why we should reject this view of God. Some people are like, Tim, you're borderline blasphemy here. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm showing why that view of God ought to be rejected, right? So because I love God, I want to show what's wrong with appealing or with advancing this view of determinism.
Well, and there's a couple of things here, Tim, that I'd like to talk about to give them a little bit of a pushback. Maybe I won't express what any particular Calvinist would say on this, but so a couple of, if it's okay that I'll push back with, is to say, okay, look, there is this understanding with some philosophically minded Calvinists, although not all hold to this for sure, that so if you look at a text like this one that we're looking at, 1 Corinthians 10, 13 through 15, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So you know probably where I'm going with this, but some would say, well, look, you can have the conditional ability and not, you have the conditional ability and the categorical ability. So perhaps all this text means is that if you had wanted to take the way of escape, there was one present. Now, if God didn't give you a way of escape, then there wouldn't have even been one present. But whether God determined you that you would take that way of escape or not is a second question. That has to do with whether you're able to do it in a different sense. Now, what would you say to something like that?
It doesn't work for several reasons. First of all, to say, well, you could have done otherwise if you had wanted to. Okay, remember I said people smuggle in libertarian freedom, and whether intentionally or unintentionally, hoping that nobody realizes what's going on. And this is why I bring in the E of ed. And these same folks get so mad when I refer to this as ed, and I keep bringing up the word exhaustive. Like, you don't even need to do that. That's redundant. And I'm like, well, then stop making those mistakes. Otherwise, I don't have to do that. I wouldn't have to do it then. But since you continue to smuggle in libertarian freedom, or you don't go all the way back and you're not thinking about the word exhaustive, even though you say the word determinism implies it, let's think about this. To say, well, you could have done otherwise if you had wanted to, raises the next question. Why didn't I want to? Well, if exhaustive divine determinism is true, it's because God determines my wants and my desires, as well as my thoughts and my beliefs. God determines the entire show. So if we're talking about exhaustive divine determinism, that move doesn't work. Now, this conditional ability, I just think is silly, because basically what it means is you could have done otherwise if God would have determined you to do otherwise. Big deal. What does that do to advance the conversation or get us anywhere? Nothing. You could have thought otherwise if God would have determined you to think otherwise. Okay, big deal. Okay, big deal. Big deal.